That single sentence has lived inside me ever since the night it happened. It still echoes when the house is quiet. The way his name rolled off that stranger's tongue, followed by laughter, glasses clinking, and the words, "Congratulations, Daniel." You finally did it. I remember standing in our kitchen, the blue light from the fridge spilling across the tiles, my thumb frozen on his phone screen. The sound played once, then again. I kept listening, waiting for something to make it make sense. Maybe a prank, maybe the wrong number, maybe anything but what it sounded like. Outside, the rain had just begun. It tapped gently against the window panes, like someone knocking to remind me that life was still moving, even if I had stopped. Before that night, my life was a steady, familiar melody, the kind you hum without noticing. I'd been married to Daniel for 15 years. We had a modest house on a quiet street, 2 grown stepkids who visited on weekends, and a garden that always smelled faintly of rosemary and wet earth. Our marriage wasn't exciting, but it was predictable. He worked in real estate management, the kind of job that demanded suits, smiles, and long phone calls. I ran a small home bakery, taking orders from neighbors and local cafes. My mornings began with butter and sugar, my evenings with the faint static of the evening news. We had our rituals. He read the paper before bed. I watered the plants twice a day, once for them, once for myself. On Sundays, we ate breakfast at the old diner downtown, always ordering the same thing: black coffee for him, pancakes for me. He'd sit across from me, eyes half on his phone, half on the TV above the counter. Sometimes he'd reach across and squeeze my hand. Quick, absent-minded, the kind of affection that feels like remembering rather than wanting. Still, I believed we were fine. We'd survived harder years, layoffs, illness, his mother's endless criticism. Mrs. Henderson never thought I was good enough. "You married comfort, not ambition," she told me once, during a Christmas dinner that ended in polite silence. Daniel laughed it off then, saying, "Ignore her, Lena. She just likes to stir the pot." And I did. For years, I brushed off her sharp comments and Daniel's occasional distance, convincing myself this was what long marriages became. Not burning fires, but steady coals. That particular evening started like any other. I'd been finishing an order of lemon cakes for a neighbor's anniversary party. The air smelled of sugar and zest, my apron dotted with flour fingerprints. Daniel had texted earlier, "Working late, don't wait up." I didn't think much of it. It was around 9 p.m. when my sister, Ava, called. My phone battery was dead, so I grabbed Daniel's phone from the counter to return her call. His passcode was the same, our wedding date. Before I could dial, a red notification blinked on his voicemail icon. He rarely used voicemail. He hated it. Curiosity, not suspicion, made me tap play. That's when I heard the voice. "Hey, Daniel, just wanted to say congratulations, man. Everyone here is thrilled for you and Nora. Happy engagement. We'll toast to you both tonight." Then laughter. A woman's giggle in the background. Clinking glasses. I remember the sound of the knife slipping from my hand onto the counter, the small metallic echo that filled the kitchen. For a second, I actually smiled. The absurdity of it. An engagement? My husband? But my body didn't buy the joke. My heart began to hammer, cold rising through my chest. I replayed it once more, slower, this time catching that the sender's name was Marcus, one of Daniel's co-workers. I stood there staring at the phone, the screen fading to black, reflecting my own face back at me. Flour on my cheek, eyes too wide. I didn't call Eva back. I just turned off the oven, washed my hands twice, though they were already clean, and sat at the table until the ticking clock reached midnight. Daniel came home late, smelling faintly of rain and cologne I didn't recognize. His tie hung loose, his smile casual. "Still up?" he asked, shaking water from his coat. I wanted to ask immediately, "Who's Nora?" But something in me, that instinct women get when truth could shatter too soon, told me to wait. Instead, I smiled. "Just finishing orders." He kissed the top of my head, grabbed a plate from the counter, and reheated dinner. While he ate, I watched his movements like I was seeing him for the first time. The way he scrolled his phone under the table, the half smirk he made when a message came in, the way he avoided my eyes. He talked about a new client, a woman interested in luxury apartments by the river. I nodded, pretending to care. Inside, my thoughts twisted around that single word, engagement. When he finally went to bed, I stayed behind in the kitchen. I took his phone again, my hands trembling. I scrolled through recent calls. Marcus's name appeared 3 times that evening. So did another number, unsaved, beginning with the same area code as Daniel's office. I didn't press it. I couldn't. Instead, I deleted the voicemail, not to hide it, but because I couldn't bear to hear it again. The next morning, sunlight spilled across our kitchen table, bright and ordinary as if nothing had changed. Daniel left early, saying he had a breakfast meeting. He wore a new tie, navy blue, silk, one I'd never seen before. He looked younger somehow, energized. As soon as he left, I brewed coffee but couldn't drink it. The cup sat untouched until it went cold. My friend Rosa stopped by to pick up cupcakes for her cafe. She noticed my silence. "You look pale, Lena." "Everything okay?" I nodded, smiling too quickly. "Just tired." But my mind was already tracing patterns. Late nights, new cologne, extra meetings. All the tiny signs that had felt like routine now rearranged into warning lights. That week blurred into cautious observation. He came home later. He hid his phone under papers when he set it down. He hummed songs I didn't know, and once, when I asked where he heard them, he said, "Oh, just the radio at work." Except Daniel never listened to the radio. I started noticing other changes. His sudden urge to work out again, his insistence on buying a new car for client impressions, his mother calling more often than usual. When I answered once, she sounded strangely cheerful. "Oh, Lena, Daniel's been so busy lately. You must be proud of how far he's come." Her tone carried a glint I couldn't quite name. "I am," I replied, though I could feel my stomach tightening. That night, lying beside him, I listened to his breathing. Steady, content, oblivious. I told myself maybe the voicemail was an office joke. Maybe Nora was a client. Maybe Marcus meant nothing by it. But denial is a fragile shield, one that cracks easily under the weight of small truths. And by the end of that week, I would hear her name again. Not from his coworkers, not from gossip, but from his own mouth, whispered in sleep. The night he whispered her name, I didn't even realize what I was hearing at first. He'd been talking in his sleep for years, half-murmured words, fragments of work, random thoughts. I usually smiled, rolled over, and went back to sleep. But that night, it was different. It was soft, drawn out, almost tender. "Nora? Yeah, I'll be there soon." My eyes opened before my mind caught up. I lay perfectly still, the sound of rain outside mixing with his low breathing. I waited, hoping he'd say more, maybe something to prove it wasn't real. But he only sighed, turned over, and went silent again. The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror brushing my hair, and the name kept looping in my head like a line from a bad song. Nora. It felt foreign, sharp, like a splinter under skin. I spent that day moving through my bakery work in a fog. The smell of cinnamon and vanilla usually calmed me, but every sound, the whir of the mixer, the ding of the oven, seemed too loud. I dropped a tray of cookies halfway through baking and burned my hand trying to save them. Rosa came in later and gasped when she saw the red mark. "You're distracted, honey." Did Daniel say something? I just smiled, bandaged my hand, and lied. No, just tired. It was easier than explaining something I wasn't even sure of. That evening, I decided to pay more attention, not to accuse, but to see. It's funny how once suspicion takes root, everything becomes evidence. He came home with a faint trace of perfume that wasn't mine, something floral, younger, expensive. When I leaned in for a kiss, he turned his head slightly, pretending to cough. His phone, once left casually on the counter, now lived in his pocket, even while he showered. I told myself it could all be coincidence. That's what faithful wives do. They bargain with logic to avoid heartbreak. A few nights later, I found another small clue. I'd been folding laundry in our bedroom, sorting through the week's clothes. In the pocket of his blazer, I found a crumpled receipt from a jewelry store downtown. The date was 2 weeks earlier. The item description read, "Custom order, platinum ring, size 6, engraving pending." I stared at it for a full minute before realizing my hands were shaking. My wedding ring was size 7. That night, I hid the receipt in my apron pocket, telling myself I'd confront him. But when he walked in, smiling, tired, holding a small bouquet of tulips, the words fell apart in my throat. He set the flowers down and said, "These made me think of you. Tulips, my favorite." I almost laughed. It felt rehearsed, like an actor remembering his lines. Still, I played my part too. "Thank you," I said softly. "They're beautiful." He kissed my cheek, asked about my day, and told me about a team dinner scheduled for tomorrow. Another late night. That was when the ache in my chest shifted into something sharper. Awareness. The next morning, I called Rosa and asked her to cover my deliveries. "I just need to take care of something," I told her. By afternoon, I was parked across the street from Daniel's office. It was something I never imagined myself doing, the kind of thing women in movies do when they've already accepted the worst. But I hadn't accepted anything yet. At exactly 6:10 p.m., Daniel walked out. He wasn't alone. A woman followed beside him, laughing, touching his arm as if she'd done it 1,000 times before. Tall, brunette, polished, probably early 30s. She looked nothing like me. They crossed the street together and entered a restaurant I recognized, La Mer, one of those dim, candle-lit places people go to celebrate. I sat there gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I could have walked in. I could have confronted him right there. But I didn't. Instead, I just watched through the rain-smeared windshield, the two of them sitting close, heads tilted toward each other. He looked happy. When he got home that night, he smelled of wine and mint. He kissed my forehead as I pretended to be asleep, then went to shower. From under the blanket, I heard him humming. That same tune again, soft and careless. The next few days unfolded like a slow unraveling. I became a detective in my own marriage. Tiny things stood out. The way he started dressing better, the sudden gym membership, the new aftershave. His mother called again, her tone smug, like someone who knew a secret. "You must be proud of Daniel," she said. "He's really stepping up lately." I wanted to ask, stepping up to what? Instead, I said, "Yes. He's been very busy." When we hung up, I sat at the table staring at my coffee until it went cold again. That weekend, I checked his car. I told myself it was only to find my missing umbrella. In the glove compartment, I found a small white envelope, an invitation. "Marcus and Rachel invite you to celebrate the engagement of Daniel Henderson and Nora Price, Saturday, June 5th. I froze. There it was. Proof written in gold cursive letters. My husband's full name, printed next to hers. The venue was the same restaurant where I'd seen them days earlier. I held the envelope like it might burn me. Then I slipped it back and closed the glove box, my heartbeat a drum in my ears. When I walked back inside, Daniel was on the couch, reading the paper, as if the world hadn't shifted under our feet. He looked up and smiled. "Everything okay?" I smiled back. "Yes, everything's fine." It was the first lie that came out smoothly. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, my thoughts looping between rage and disbelief. I wanted to scream, to cry, to demand answers. But instead, I planned. If he wanted an engagement, I'd let him have one. Just not the way he imagined. The morning after I found that invitation, I woke up with a strange calm. The kind that comes when pain hardens into purpose. I made breakfast like always. Pancakes, coffee. Daniel came downstairs humming that same song again, the one I now recognized from Lemaire's playlist. He sat down, kissed my cheek, and said, "You're up early." "Big order today?" I smiled without looking up. Something like that. He scrolled his phone while eating, fingers tapping, smiling faintly at whatever was on the screen. Every once in a while, I caught a reflection of his face in the window. Too relaxed, too pleased. When he left for work, I stood at the doorway and watched him walk to his car. He waved without turning around, and I realized something. He wasn't hiding because he feared being caught. He thought I'd never look. That arrogance was his weakness. I decided I wouldn't confront him blindly. I needed proof, not for revenge, but for my own peace. Something solid I could hold when he inevitably gaslighted me with calm lies. That evening, while he showered, I took his phone from the sink counter. His password was still the same. Our wedding date. It almost made me laugh. Inside his photo gallery, I found exactly what I feared. A dozen pictures from La Mer. Candles. Wine glasses. A woman's hand resting on his. The same brunette I'd seen outside his office, now smiling, wearing a silver ring that gleamed even in the dim light. In one photo, Daniel was kneeling. Not dramatically, but enough to make it unmistakable. A small box in hand. My throat tightened. My knees went weak, and I had to sit down on the edge of the bathtub. The sound of the shower running behind me felt distant, muffled. He had proposed, and the worst part? He'd been proud enough to photograph it. Later that night, I sat at the kitchen table alone, staring at the phone screen. Every tap of my thumb brought another image. Them laughing, eating dessert, her hand on his arm, that ring catching light. Each photo felt like another heartbeat lost. But one picture stopped me cold. A group shot. Daniel, Nora, and two others. His co-worker, Marcus, and his mother. Mrs. Henderson stood beside Nora, smiling, her arm linked through hers, like they'd known each other for months. I whispered out loud to no one, "You knew. You both knew." When Daniel came into the kitchen a few minutes later, towel draped over his shoulders, I was still holding his phone. He froze. For a moment, neither of us spoke. His eyes darted to the screen, then to me. The silence between us was thick, heavier than shouting could ever be. Finally, he said softly, "Lena, I can explain." I set the phone down. My voice didn't tremble. Then explain. He opened his mouth, closed it, rubbed his forehead like he was searching for the right lie. "It's not what it looks like." I laughed, short, sharp, bitter. "It's exactly what it looks like, Daniel. You proposed to another woman. You smiled for pictures. You let your mother stand beside her like she was welcoming a daughter-in-law." He flinched at that. She didn't mean harm. She just what? Thought you deserved a second wife? He sighed, lowering his voice. "It's complicated. You've been distant. We barely talk. You're always busy with your baking and your sister. I didn't plan this. It just happened?" I finished for him. "Love doesn't just happen when you're married, Daniel. Lies do." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration breaking through his mask. "Lena, I didn't want to hurt you." "But you did, and you filmed it." The words hung there like smoke. He reached for me, but I stepped back. "Please," he said quietly, "just give me time." "I'll fix this." I almost pitied him. Standing there in our kitchen, dripping water on the tile, still wearing his wedding ring while speaking of fixing an engagement. "Fix it?" I repeated, my voice soft. "How do you fix a proposal to another woman?" He didn't answer. He just stood there, guilt written all over his face. Finally, I said, "You should go stay with your mother tonight." He blinked. "What?" "I don't want to look at you right now." He hesitated, opened his mouth to argue, but something in my expression stopped him. He left without another word. When the door shut, I sat at the kitchen table, shaking. Not from sadness, but from the sheer release of finally knowing. The next morning, Mrs. Henderson showed up unannounced. She didn't knock. She never did. Her perfume hit me before her voice did. Sweet and powdery, like the women who believe good manners can hide cruelty. "Elena," she said, stepping inside, "Daniel told me you overreacted." You always did have a temper." I stared at her. "Did he tell you I found the pictures?" She blinked, faltering slightly, then recovered. "Sometimes a man has needs you can't meet anymore. You've become comfortable." "You know how men are," I let out a slow breath. "And what are women supposed to be, Mrs. Henderson? Replacements on standby?" Her lips thinned. "Don't make this uglier than it already is. Nora makes him happy. If you love him, let him go." That was it, the sentence that turned my heartbreak into something solid. I looked her in the eye and said quietly, "Then you should have raised him to keep his vows." She frowned, muttered something under her breath, and left. When the door closed, I felt the quiet settle around me like armor. I spent that week preparing, not for revenge, but for revelation. I printed every photo, every receipt, every message. I even printed the engagement invitation I'd found in his car. Then I called Marcus's wife, Rachel, the one whose name was on that invitation. She sounded hesitant when I introduced myself. "Rachel, I think you might want to hear this before that engagement party happens," I said gently. There was a long silence on the other end before she whispered, "Oh my God." Turns out she already suspected something too, not about Daniel, but about her own husband. And that made what I proposed next much easier. Saturday came, the day of the engagement party. I dressed carefully, not for him, but for me. A soft blue dress, simple pearls, no tears, no anger. I walked into La Mer just as the first toast began. The room fell silent when I appeared. Daniel's face went pale. Nora's hand froze mid-air, champagne glass trembling. "Lena," he stammered, "what are you doing here?" I smiled, a calm, practiced smile. "Oh, I just came to congratulate you both. After all, it's not every day a man gets engaged while still married." The murmur that rippled through the room was like a slow wave. Gasps, whispers, someone coughing awkwardly. I pulled a small envelope from my purse and set it on the table. "Proof," I said simply, "for anyone curious." Inside were the photos, the receipts, the invitation. Nora's face drained of color. She looked at Daniel, then at his mother, who, for once, had nothing to say. Daniel tried to speak, but the crowd was already moving. Colleagues whispering, friends avoiding eye contact. Mrs. Henderson reached out as if to pull me aside. I stepped back. "Don't worry," I told her softly. "You raised him well." He finally learned how to perform, just not in the way you hoped. Then I turned and walked out. Outside, the evening air felt sharp and clean. For the first time in months, I could breathe. Behind me, I heard commotion. A door slamming, raised voices, but none of it mattered anymore. I wasn't part of that story now. The night of the engagement party replayed in my mind like a scene from a film I didn't audition for. I hadn't planned to humiliate anyone. I only wanted truth to breathe in public for once. But as I sat in my car outside La Mer, the adrenaline slowly drained, replaced by something deeper. The quiet collapse of a life I thought was mine. Rain began again, soft at first, then steady. It blurred the windshield into a shimmer of city lights. I watched the droplets race each other downward, thinking how grief does the same. It never stops. It just finds new directions. I drove aimlessly for a while, past the bridge where Daniel and I used to walk after dinners, past the bakery that still had my name painted on the window in fading gold. Everything looked the same, and yet I was no longer the same woman looking at it. When I finally reached home, the house felt hollow. No scent of aftershave, no shoes by the door, no hum of the television. Just quiet, the kind that echoes back your own heartbeat. I hung my coat, poured tea, and sat in the chair by the window. The garden was drenched, rosemary bending under the rain. I had always loved the smell after a storm, that sharp freshness that feels like renewal. I clung to it that night. Daniel didn't call. Not that night, not the next morning. By noon, his mother did. "You've ruined everything, Elena," she hissed through the phone. "Do you have any idea what you've done to his career?" I closed my eyes, exhaling. "Funny," I said. "I thought he ruined our marriage." She started to say something, but I hung up. It felt strange, freeing, to end a conversation without apology. That afternoon, I did something I never thought I would. I went to see a lawyer. Her name was Marla, mid-50s, calm eyes, silver streaks in her hair. She didn't pity me. She listened. That alone felt like oxygen. When I finished, she said, "You're clear-headed." That's good. The ones who come in screaming usually aren't ready to move forward. "I'm not sure I am," I admitted, "but I can't keep living like this." She nodded. "Then we start small. Separate finances, change passwords, protect your business. And you don't tell him yet. Let him think you're still undecided." Her practicality steadied me. I wasn't taking revenge. I was reclaiming ground. A few days later, Daniel showed up at the house. He didn't knock this time either. Old habits die hard. He looked tired, hollow-eyed, wearing the same suit from the party. Rain darkened his shoulders. "Lena, please," he said softly. "Can we talk?" I let him in. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd once rolled dough and laughter. He spoke first. "It's over with Nora." I almost smiled. That was fast. "She left that night, said she couldn't handle the humiliation." "Poor thing," I murmured. "Imagine being embarrassed at your own engagement party." He winced. "I deserve that." I folded my arms. "You deserve worse, Daniel. But I don't do cruelty. I do closure." He looked up sharply. "You're leaving me." "I already did." "The night you said yes to someone else." He ran his hands over his face, exhaling shakily. "I made a mistake. I got lost. You stopped seeing me." "I saw you every day," I said quietly. "I just didn't recognize what you were becoming." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The clock ticked loudly, a reminder that time had already chosen sides. Finally, I stood. "There's paperwork on the counter. It's not a divorce yet, just protection. I'm not rushing you, but I am done saving you." He looked at the papers, then back at me, eyes glassy. "Do you still love me?" The question came out broken, like he already knew the answer. I hesitated, not because I didn't know, but because the truth felt heavier than anger. "I love the man you used to be," I said, "the one who fixed my coffee before his own, the one who believed promises were sacred. I don't know where he went." He swallowed hard, nodded once, and left without another word. Over the next weeks, life reshaped itself around the silence he left. I worked longer hours, not for distraction, but for meaning. The smell of sugar and lemon returned to my kitchen. The rhythm of kneading dough steadied my breathing. Customers began to notice I seemed calmer. One woman said, "You have that glow, the kind that comes after surviving something big." I smiled and handed her a cupcake. "Maybe it's just the sugar," I said. But it wasn't. It was something quieter, the peace that follows honesty. Then one evening, an unexpected visitor arrived, Nora. She stood at my door holding a small box, her eyes swollen from crying. "I know I shouldn't be here," she said, voice trembling, "but I needed to tell you something." I hesitated, then stepped aside. "Come in." She sat at the table, clutching the box. "I didn't know he was still married." "He said you were separated." I believed her, not because I wanted to, but because her pain looked too young to be practiced. She slid the box toward me. "He bought this for you." "Months ago." His mother made him change the engraving. Inside was a ring, platinum, simple, elegant. The engraving read, "To Nora, new beginnings." A chill passed through me. "I don't want it," I said softly. She nodded. "Neither do I." We sat in silence for a while. Then she whispered, "He's been calling me non-stop." I blocked him. "I think he's lost everything." I looked out the window. Sometimes losing everything is the only way people start to see. When she left, I placed the ring on the mantel beside a wilted tulip, not out of sentiment, but as a reminder. Days turned into weeks. Daniel tried again. Emails, letters, a voicemail where he said he'd joined therapy, that he'd found faith again. I didn't respond. Healing doesn't require closure from the person who broke you. It requires peace from the person you become. So I began packing boxes, not out of sadness, but readiness. The house was too full of echoes. By spring, I found a small apartment near the sea. Sunlight on pale curtains, the smell of salt and bread mingling in the mornings. I reopened my bakery under a new name, Second Rise. When I looked at the sign for the first time, I smiled. It wasn't just about bread. It was about me. One evening, as I was closing the shop, my sister Ava walked in. She hugged me tight, whispering, "You're glowing, Lena." "I haven't seen you like this in years," I laughed. "Maybe it's the ocean air." She looked at me knowingly. "Or maybe it's freedom." I didn't answer. Some truths don't need words. That night, as the waves crashed outside my window, I finally deleted the last voicemail from Daniel. It wasn't the one that broke my heart. It was the one where he said he still loved me. I didn't need that echo anymore. The first time I saw Daniel again after I left, it was by accident. I had gone back into town to renew a supplier contract and stopped by the cafe where I used to deliver my cupcakes. When I stepped inside, I almost turned around. He was sitting alone near the window. No suit, no phone, no audience. Just a man with a paper cup and an expression I didn't recognize. Our eyes met for a second. I saw something there I hadn't seen in years. Humility. Maybe even regret. He stood, hesitated, then walked over. "Lena?" he said softly, as if saying my name might still carry warmth. I nodded once. "Daniel." He looked thinner. His hands trembled slightly when he held his coffee. "You look different." "I am," I said. He smiled sadly. "I heard about your new bakery." "Second Rise." "That's a good name," I gave a polite nod. "Thank you." For a moment, silence stretched between us. Then he said, "I wanted to apologize." I raised an eyebrow. "You already did." "Many times. This one's different," he said quietly. "I lost everything, Lena. The company, the house. Even Mom won't speak to me now I didn't respond. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. It was distance, like looking at a painting of a life I'd once lived." He continued, "I deserve it, I know. But sometimes I wish I could undo that night." I tilted my head. "Which night, Daniel? The one you proposed to her? Or the one I finally saw who you were?" He flinched, then nodded. "Both." I took a slow breath. "You can't undo betrayal. You can only outlive it." He opened his mouth as if to say more, but the barista called my order. I took the bag, gave him one last steady look, and walked out. Behind me, I heard him whisper my name again, but this time it was just a sound. Empty, fading. In small towns, stories travel faster than forgiveness. By midsummer, everyone knew about Daniel's downfall. His firm had terminated his contract after Nora's family filed a complaint. Apparently, he'd promised her investments that never existed. Marcus had been demoted, and Mrs. Henderson, once so proud and controlling, had quietly moved to another city to avoid gossip. Rosa told me all this one afternoon as we sorted cupcakes. "You're famous now," she teased gently. "The woman who caught two cheaters with one truth." I laughed softly. "Fame isn't what I wanted." "No," she said, smiling, "but peace looks good on you." It did. Peace had lines, silence, and the smell of freshly baked bread. One evening, as I closed Second Rise, a woman came in just as I was turning the sign to closed. She looked familiar, dark hair, quiet eyes. It took me a second to realize it was Nora. "Hi," she said, hesitant. "I heard you open this place." I nodded slowly. "You heard right." She looked around the small bakery, the soft yellow lights, the rows of bread still cooling on the rack. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Peaceful." I smiled faintly. That's the goal. She hesitated, then said, "I wanted to tell you, I'm leaving the city. I got a new job in another state. I'm starting over." "I'm glad," I said. "You deserve that." She took a deep breath, eyes glistening. "You could have destroyed me, you know. Publicly. But you didn't. I'll never forget that." I shrugged gently. "You didn't ruin my life, Nora. You just showed me who I was living it with." She nodded, swallowed hard, and left. When the bell above the door stopped ringing, I stood alone in the quiet, realizing something profound. Forgiveness isn't a gift you give others. It's a freedom you give yourself. Weeks later, I received an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single photo. Our old house, for sale sign in the yard. On the back, in handwriting I recognized, it read, "I hope you find a better home than I ever gave you. D." I folded it once, slid it into a drawer, and never opened it again. The community had already chosen its side, though I never asked them to. At the farmer's market, people greeted me with kindness that carried quiet admiration. "Good to see you smiling again, Lena. You taught us all something about strength." It was strange being seen as a symbol. I wasn't a hero. I was just a woman who decided she deserved honesty. One Sunday morning, months later, I stood by the sea outside my apartment. The tide was low, sunlight glinting off wet sand. A little boy ran past me holding a red balloon, laughing, and for the first time in a long time, I felt light, as if the last remnants of bitterness had finally washed away. I whispered to the waves, "Thank you." Not to anyone in particular, just to the world for letting me start again. When I turned to go back inside, my reflection caught in the glass door. Older, wiser, softer. And behind that reflection, I could see every version of myself I had outgrown. The trusting wife, the betrayed woman, the quiet fighter, the survivor. All of them had brought me here. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Rosa stopped by with a bottle of wine. "Two endings," she said, pouring 2 glasses. I smiled, "and beginnings." We clinked glasses and laughed, the kind of laughter that carries no bitterness, only release. Outside, the sky burned gold over the ocean. Inside, I felt something I hadn't in years. Wholeness. Peace didn't come all at once. It arrived slowly. In the quiet mornings, in the rhythm of the waves outside my window, in the way I no longer checked my phone out of habit. Every day, I built something small back into my life. A new recipe, a morning walk by the sea, a fresh flower in a jar by the bakery counter. Each one felt like a stitch, sewing together the torn fabric of who I used to be. I started waking up before dawn again, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. There's something sacred about those early hours, when the sky is still deciding between night and light. It's when the world feels honest. Sometimes I would brew coffee and sit on the porch, listening to the ocean's hush. The same silence that used to frighten me now felt like a friend. It no longer reminded me of loneliness, it reminded me of peace. Running Second Rise became more than a business. It became therapy. Each loaf I baked felt symbolic. Flour, water, patience, and time. You can't rush bread. You have to let it rise, fall, and rise again. And maybe that's what healing is, too. Customers began to recognize the symbolism. One woman asked me once, "Why the name Second Rise?" I smiled. "Because sometimes the second time we rise, it's on our own terms." She nodded, eyes softening. "Then I hope my life bakes half as well as your bread." Ava, my sister, became my anchor again. She'd visit every weekend, bringing laughter and small gossip about family and neighbors. One evening, as we sipped wine on my porch, she asked, "Do you ever miss him?" I thought about that for a long time. The moonlight glowed on the waves, turning them silver. "I miss who I thought he was," I said finally, "but I don't miss living in doubt. I don't miss watching his eyes drift to places I couldn't follow." She reached over, squeezed my hand. "You're stronger than you think, Lena." I smiled faintly. Maybe I always was. I just forgot months passed. The seasons shifted again, and one afternoon I received an invitation. Not from Daniel, but from his mother. It was hand-delivered, the envelope trembling slightly in the hands of a courier. Inside was a brief letter. "Elena, I won't ask for forgiveness, but I need to see you once. Please," I almost threw it away. Almost. But something in me, that small voice that believes closure is kinder than avoidance, told me to go. We met at a small park halfway between her new city and mine. She looked older, fragile, her once stiff posture softened by time and regret. She spoke first. "I was wrong," she said quietly, "about you. About everything I didn't interrupt." She went on. "I thought I was protecting him. I didn't realize I was ruining him. When he fell apart, I blamed you. But truth is, I made him weak." Her voice broke. For the first time in all the years I'd known her, I saw real tears. I said softly, "You can't change the past, Mrs. Henderson, but you can stop carrying it." She nodded, trembling. "I heard you opened a bakery." "That's beautiful." "It saved me," I said simply. She smiled faintly. "Then I'm glad something good came from all this." We didn't hug. We didn't need to. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't need touch, just acknowledgement. As I walked back to my car, I realized the anger I'd carried toward her had dissolved somewhere between her confession and the sunset. A year later, Second Rise won a small business award from the city. They called my name at the ceremony, and as I walked up to the stage, the applause felt strange. Not for what I'd survived, but for what I'd built. When the interviewer asked, "What inspired your journey?" I said, "Betrayal taught me what integrity really means." And silence taught me the sound of my own strength. That night, I returned home and stood by the ocean again. The tide was high, moonlight painting the water in long silver ribbons. I closed my eyes and thought of every woman who'd ever stood where I once stood, staring at a phone, hearing words that break everything you believed in. I wished I could reach back and tell her, "You will not drown in this. You will rise again, softer, wiser, stronger." Sometimes I still think of Daniel, not with love, not with hate, just understanding. Some people are lessons disguised as lovers. He sent one last letter months later through Eva. He wrote that he'd moved overseas, started over, joined a counseling group. He thanked me for setting him free. I smiled when I read it. Not because it moved me, but because it no longer did. That's when I knew I was healed. A few weeks later, I hosted a community baking day at Second Rise. Families came, children kneading dough with messy hands, laughter echoing through the shop. As I watched them, I felt the weight of everything I'd carried finally lift. Life wasn't about avoiding pain, it was about choosing who you become after it. When the sun began to set, I stood at the counter, flour on my apron, warmth in my chest. The bell above the door jingled as the last customers left. I turned the sign to closed, wiped my hands, and whispered to the empty room, "We did it." Not to Daniel, not to the past, to myself. When I look back now, I realize the story wasn't really about betrayal. It was about awakening. There's a version of me that once lived in silence, smiling while bleeding inside, calling it love when it was really fear of starting over. I used to think marriage meant endurance, even when it hurt, that good wives stayed, forgave, endured. But standing there that night, listening to a stranger's voice say, "Happy engagement" on my husband's phone, that was the moment the lie cracked open. And when it did, I didn't find rage inside it. I found truth. Truth doesn't destroy you. It just burns away what was never real. I lost a husband, I lost a home. but I found my self-respect in the ashes. And when you find that, when you finally see your worth without anyone else's permission, it's like stepping into sunlight after living too long in someone else's shadow. People sometimes come into Second Rise and ask if I'm the woman from that story. I always smile and tell them, yes, but that story ended long ago. Now I bake new ones every day because that's the quiet secret of healing. It doesn't look dramatic. It looks like waking up one morning and realizing you didn't think about the past when you poured your first cup of coffee. It looks like peace sitting across from you at breakfast. And finally, it stays. If you're listening to this story and you've ever found yourself replaying a voicemail that broke your heart, if you've ever stared at a truth you didn't want to see, wondering if you'll ever feel whole again, hear me when I say this. You will. It won't happen all at once. It'll come in quiet, unremarkable ways. In the mornings, you don't cry. In the nights, you sleep soundly. In the laughter that surprises you when you thought you'd forgotten how. One day, you'll wake up and realize you're not surviving anymore. You're living. So, would you have done what I did? Would you have walked away that night? Or would you have stayed and tried to fix what was already broken beyond repair? Tell me in the comments. I read every story you share, and maybe together we'll remind someone out there that they're not alone. And if you're still healing, take it one sunrise at a time, because the second rise, the one where you rebuild from truth, is always the sweetest.